Hi, it's Sean Haynes with the Agri CFO and the Ag Center, giving you weekly commentary on everything agriculture here in the Valley. Just want to say thanks to everybody coming out to our tailgate this week and watching Fresno State play Eastern Washington at home. Nice to see everybody out there having a good time, relaxing, seeing a good piece of Americana football. Even nicer that we won, although it was double overtime, so we'll have to talk about that later. Lots going on here in the Valley as far as harvest goes, kind of finishing up the crop season. Switching from summer to fall, and kind of a lot going on. So here we go. Beef on dairy calves kind of holding at that 625, 630 range on drop calves and 325 for Holsteins. Market's still real tight. If you look at meat production year over year, we're kind of down 6% for the year. And cattle, inventory is still low. No rebuilding going on. Drought monitor back east doesn't give any incentive for that either to change that kind of course. We're still like 40 to 44% of all the ground back east that cattle are on are kind of in a drought monitor side. So I think that's going to be the case for a while. Some of the concerns, though, we're getting some softening on the box beef side. We're down like a 313 on these choice deals. It's off about 10, 20 cents from its high. I think you're getting some pushback from the consumer, with ground beef prices at the $5.30 to $6 per pound range. That's all-time highs, and you're getting a lot of pressure on the bottom side from them as far as just cost of living. With these interest rates on housing, things like that, and it's constricting the amount of money that's available to go toward food, and they're going to start making tighter choices. So that's a little bit of a worry for me. Also, if you look at export volumes worldwide, they're kind of, for U.S. beef, they're kind of falling off a little bit as U.S. Dollar kind of remains strong. And relative to other currencies, as the yuan kind of falls apart, and a lot of parts of Asia do as well. Although some bright side on the other side is that Mexico's peso has really been getting strong against the U.S. dollar, and a lot of beef goes into Mexico from here as far as finished goods. So it's kind of this tug and war. Regardless of that, I've been talking about on my producers, and with a $3.15 per pound upfront current cash price, and then you can go out to June right now on the LRP for $297, $295 on these animals, and with this high input cost of $625 for these beef calves, and feed costs coming off, might be a good time to take some risk off the market. Go ahead and use this LRP or use a futures contract if that's what you are more comfortable with, and kind of lock in some profits on these animals. I think between the export volumes kind of slowing down and some some consumer pressure coming in, I think you got the kind of a mix a little bit for some downward pressure on prices. And I think, given the fact that there's not a lot of animals, there's been a lot of profit taken off the table already, folks are going to be willing to give some of that profit up, and that's going to eventually kind of trickle its way down to these calf owners, calf producer side. So we'll have to see where that all ends up in the long run. But thanks again for listening for the beef market news. Here's dairy here in California. Dairy prices stay pretty consistent. They've been popping up and down a couple pennies here and there on the class 3 and 4 markets. Looks like we're going to be in kind of the high $18 for August as far as we finish out, maybe $18.75, and then moving into the $19 range recently with these recent moves up on the class 4 market as this butter thing's been strengthening. Back east, these spot market loads have kind of disappeared, so cheese being made is kind of being used and going out in the market, so there isn't an additional buildup of inventories, which is good, and I think that's really been a constriction of supply back there. I mean, I know the July milk report showed kind of like a small reduction in the herd and a small reduction in overall production. I'm hoping that August kind of has an additional bump on top of that as well because of the heat that we've had back there, and these beef prices are remaining high, kind of telling these guys to call, so you can kind of see it. We're even seeing cream being shipped halfway across the United States to kind of make plants filled up back there. So it really makes me think that they're maybe not short of milk, but the supply of milk's tightened up quite a bit, and that should put some upward pressure on prices. Out here in California, production in California is down 5.5%. We're about 1/3 of the U.S. butter production out of the state, and that's really kind of helped to reduce butter volumes as well as the amount of production of butter going out, and then that's really pushed up that butter price too as far as the pricing component goes, and that's really kind of what's lifted us up recently, as well as that kind of cheese side not getting as bad. So between those two things, prices look pretty good in the $19 range through the end of the year. I'm hoping that kind of continues with low feed prices kind of being reset. We're seeing guys come off feed costs about $1.50, $2 per hundredweight. Hay, test hay's under $300. Oat and wheat hay is like up for grabs at the $120, $110 range. Silage is down in 65 in the field range to 45 depending where you're at, and then hulls will really come off too, is about $110 a ton, as well as corn softening. So you look at all that, feed costs, which are 75% of the cost on a dairy, have come way off. Milk prices coming up. You've got additional support coming in with these cull cows, at $1.10 to $1.23, and I think that's pushing up as well. So we've had this continued restriction in cattle supplies, and then you've got these beef on dairy calves and Holstein calves at $630 and $325 respectively, providing some extra income for the dairy market. So in the short, looks pretty good. I think in the long one, looks good as well. And one of the constructive comments I'm having back and forth with my dairyman is, whether or not there's a heifer hole coming up next year, and how large that is. If you talk to some people, it's 100,000 animals U.S. Other people, it's 200,000 animals U.S. But regardless, if we have this upswing in milk price and guys trying to react to it and expand milk production, I think there's going to be kind of like a ceiling there with these heifer replacements coming in, and as far as excess animals going to kind of expand milk supply. So we'll have to see where that goes. Last but not least, with these higher milk prices, take a look at your DRP. It's going to get much more affordable, as well as your cost of production dropping down to the point where you can actually make some decisions that lock up some money for yourselves. First quarter is a great time to do that, and so you should probably talk to your advisor about looking at maybe marking up that and getting it done. So that's the brightening picture for dairy here in California. Now let's get on to nuts. Almond crop is in full harvest right now. Kind of nonpareils are getting done. Independents are coming off as well. Looks like a great independence crop from everybody I'm talking to. Looking out in the market, there's been some upward pressure on prices. About a nickel to another dime again. We're getting the kind of 175 to 185 range, maybe a little north of that. Everybody seems to be in this holding pattern to really see what the crop's going to come off. There's a lot of pushback on subjective estimate, whether it was right or not. When you talk to hullers in the market, and this is just talk, huller volumes are off, anywhere from 9 to 27%, depending on what market they are, which usually means there's less nuts coming off these fields. Same time last year, and then also getting a lot of talk about some bug damage in these nuts that pushing rejects up. Normally a lot of my guys are seeing like 3 to 5% rejects, and we've been seeing 9, in some cases 21% coming out. I think if you have some nuts this year that actually don't have that defect and a good size, you're gonna get some extra premium for these in-shell markets just because of scarcity. But all of that being said, if these huller volumes continue to come down, and there seems to be an additional signal between lower volumes, i.e. lower crop, and damaged crop, which reduces the amount of crop available to sell, it's going to put a lot of downward pressure on that that kind of holding inventory that's kind of come over the carryover and help us kind of recover in prices. So kind of cross your fingers there. Walnut markets, walnut's been pushing up pretty hard past couple weeks, about 10, 15 cents. We're kind of getting to close to the point where guys' losses would be coming off, but they're still not making enough money to cover a total cost of production. You're losing 15 to 20 cents per pound when it's all said and done, unless you're crazy good yields. And a lot of that pressure is coming from, you get some stuff in China coming back on their production where they've got a lot of flooding that may impact their ability to produce nuts, and they're the biggest crop right now by far. And also for some additional demand as the chili crop kind of tails out and is all done, it's being sold. So we'll have to see where that goes. Pistachios, another kind of a weird story. Just a huge bumper crop kind of coming in, still had a carry in because export market's really tight because the dollar's so strong, and it's just been falling off of a cliff and getting down to this, maybe half of what they were at their peak before. So I think the pistachio growers are really going to take a hard look at how they're marketing their crop, and also whether on the long run, if you've got too much of a crop out there when you combine it with all other nuts. But that's not a popular opinion, so don't stab me for it in my sleep. But I think you got to take a real hard look at some of these high prices that people have been paying for pistachio orchards for quite a bit of time, and whether or not that's really going to be returning what they expected to return, given kind of this downward pressure on prices that's all of a sudden popped up, especially with this first big crop and a lot of non-bearing trees kind of come in behind it, and some good water for the next couple of years. So that's all the information we have on nut harvest here in California. Here we go for crops. Cotton came off a little bit this week. We're down to 84 cents for October, about a nickel off. It's kind of just a standard market. Planting's in, conditions have been okay for production. Demand stays kind of consistent there as well. So there's just nothing to really push it up or push it down. So it looks like the crop's going to come in a pretty decent state here in California this year, and get a decent price that's going to make a profit, but not so much as last year when we were in the $1.10, $1.20 range. Kind of getting to the end of the strawberry harvest here. Flats are down to $7 for conventional, $11 for organic. Stuff's coming from Mexico, which is typically normal for this time of year, and kind of pushing prices down a little bit. We should tail out. Looks like the crop's off about 10 to 12%, with some intentions I'm hearing for increasing acreage next year because prices are pretty decent. Stone fruits kind of tailing out, getting these linear varieties coming in. Sizing continues to be good. There seems to be a lot of downside pressure as far as pests go, and prices have been kind of consistent on all the stone fruit. And from that case, tomato harvest is in full swing. Keep getting shots of rain here and there and regionally, which is kind of a problem. It's creating white mold underneath the plant and black mold on top. I think the crop is just kind of at that stage right now where it's really ripe for mildew issues because of the moisture and the heat that came right afterward. And guys are trying to get in the field and kind of get that done as fast as they can and then blend it out. But we'll have to see where that ends up. Yields have been really good in the 60 to 70 paid tons range for most guys with a high price of 138 to 150, depending on your seasonal bonuses. And so most folks are going to make a good income off this crop this year as long as they can get it in and not have a ton of mold damage, which is really just scheduling with the processors and how much is coming at the process at one time. The crop really matured all kind of at once and is really kind of glutting up the supply chain, and we'll see if they manage to do that. Also having issues down south with table grapes, huge amount of grapes down there, kind of mildewing on the vine. Again, got some moisture at the time we have all the sugar, feeds the mildew. It's been going through, guys have been kind of sulfur and trying to get ahead of it, but the grape crop on these blenders is going to be taking a hit this year. And then you also your table grapes kind of in the Fresno area through Kern, also hurting a little bit, and it's been pushing prices up on 19-pound bags, but we'll have to see how that kind of ends up. Silage crops, $40 up in the north market. It's kind of where the low range goes as far as in the field, down to about 55 low range down here in the Tulare area, as high as 65 in both markets. Crops coming off good yields this year. A lot lower than last year, looking $20, $30 for last year to this year. You still got a lot of wheat and oat, hay in the fields. Guys are looking at kind of sell that off. So I think a lot of my dairymen are looking at the fact that, hey, I can buy this hay cheaper than I can grow it for right now. So I'm going to buy this cereal hay, put it in the barn, and just chop that winter wheat off or winter oats off, which should have a downside pressure on standing value of those crops in the field. So we'll kind of see where that ends up. I'm here about $40 for wheat already in the field for next year. And then just good moisture conditions, looking at a good El Nino effect coming into the winter. So hopefully they're right. And we'll kind of give you some final estimates on what the corn harvest looked like when it came off as far as corn silage average yields, as well as starches in different markets. But that's the crop business here in California. Let's talk interest rates. Bond markets in the long end kind of continue to push up a little bit. I think people are just kind of pricing that rate rise, and there's just continued demand for those deposits, for those bonds as a safe investment source for to make money right now. Stock market's pretty volatile, and there's not much else to put it into that kind of gives you a nice risk rate return that these are giving you. That's also pushing up overall home mortgage rates. 30-year average home mortgage rates kind of like 7.75, 7.77 when I'm looking at 6.9 for the jumbos. That's really pushed up rates compared to last year, and they continue to kind of inch up about 0.05 to 0.1 per week over time. A lot of folks watching this jobs report, and then subsequently after that, the CPI report's coming out next week or so, and we really need to see kind of a downward jobs report as well as CPI kind of coming off, or at least holding flat, not popping up again. If you get a pop up of the CPI report and core inflation and a strong jobs report, I think it's going to send a signal to the Fed to possibly increase rates again, which is a potential. A lot of folks are kind of saying, hey, quarter to a half point rise in rates again if these things don't kind of pull off. Is very doable for the Fed, and the Fed's kind of inclined their head to the same point. So we'll have to kind of see where it ends up. A lot of pressure on the consumer sentiment side. I got some questions last week. Hey, if the general economy is doing so well on the GDP side, why do I feel so poor on the other side? And I think what a lot of folks are feeling is that it's called like a silent depression, right? Where the income in the United States used to be predominantly generated by the middle of America, right? And maybe the upper middle class. 60, 70% of income was generated by these folks and flowed through the economy. So when the GDP was doing well, 70% of the people felt that. And then 30% of the people at the top kind of felt as well, and the rich. But you had this inordinate amount of people down below, right? That rich layer, I call it, feeling that. Now it's flipped in the past 20, 30 years. Really, you've got 70% of the income being generated by like the top 10 or 20% of the people in the United States. And then the rest of it kind of be distributed down below. Maybe not quite that bad, but it's kind of flipped. And so when this GDP is doing really well, very few people at the top are feeling that, right? Because they're getting an inordinate amount of that GDP kind of thrown their way, where down below the folks don't generate as much as they used to, and so they feel a lot poorer, as well as the effects of inflation hit them more, right? Because they're not sitting at fixed assets where people with high net worth tend to be. And so when inflation's up and pushes asset prices higher, those folks at the top tend to do better because they're holding stocks and real estate and other types of fixed assets move up, where folks down lower on the economic scale are sitting more on cash and things like that. They're much more disposable and kind of lose their value in an inflationary market. So that's kind of on the GDP side where things are happening. Another guy asked me kind of explain why that silent depression is kind of going on with housing prices and why people, housing's really slowed down as far as approvals go. And a great example is that it's 2020, and house was worth about maybe $300,000 in this part of the market that I live in, and rates were 3%, and that value of that house, that payment on the house, is about $1,800 a month, right? And at $1,800 a month to qualify for that house, I had to make $60,000 per year, which isn't too bad, right? A single person working a good job could have qualified to buy a house in my market. Now, fast forward just 3 years to 2023, the average house price is about $450,000 in the market. I'm looking at a 7.5% rate to 7.77 rate, and that house payment's now gone from $1,800 to $3,800. Same house, 3 years, $2,000 more per month, and then my income that I got to qualify for that same house is now $120,000, right? So the house has gone up maybe 50% in value, but the amount of income I got to make to kind of track that house has doubled, and that's assuming no other debt I've got in my books, right? So you've got this continued pinching, and that's why I keep telling folks like this housing market doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because if you look at the affordability of these homes, people can't afford to get into them, and so therefore, why would they sell them? Or why would they be able to buy them? And this market is just kind of stagnated, because you also have people on the other side that have homes that they've got fixed at 3% or 4% or 5%, much cheaper, and they'll be damned if let that house go. And they've psychologically gotten around that the house is worth a lot more than it probably really is when it looks at affordability. So yeah, it's kind of this push and pull. You wonder where it's going to bake out, if there's going to be a correction in prices or what. And on the other side, I'm just watching debt. Credit card debt defaults and loan defaults are at the highest in 10 years, as well as credit card debt. And then if you look at it, personal savings, a lot of folks looking at personal savings have just been shrinking exponentially over the past few months, and really going to kind of be back into a negative savings territory as far as the U.S. goes by the end of this month in September. And so you've kind of exhausted your liquidity, you're using credit, kind of could go day to day, and you wonder what's going to happen to the foreclosure market when all that kind of coalesces and comes into one spot. So I don't see a lot of bright spots as far as the real estate markets go in the short term. It's same things going on with real estate on the ag side as far as commodity prices. So in the long and the short of it, just these rates, as long as they stay high and continue to push up there, but we don't get the movement that those rates should be causing in the rest of the economy, we're kind of in a stuck position where rates possibly continue to stay higher, get pushed up even further to kind of get things to where the Fed wants them to be. So that is the long and short on interest rates this week. Thanks for listening to all the ancient words of wisdom from me on the commodity markets here in California. I appreciate you guys' time and patience, and also your feedback that you've been giving me lately. It's nice to kind of have some back and forth on this stuff. I love agriculture here in California. It's diversified. It's always changing. It's always interesting, and I appreciate you guys kind of coming on the ride with me so far. So stay tuned for more. Please subscribe, click the like button, share this thing, kind of get it out there. It's fun to watch it grow, and I appreciate all the help. Thanks.